I went too far. Okay. So as Rachel said, my name is Crystal Bloom. I am the environmental group manager for the stormwater construction section in DEP's Bureau of Clean Water. And with me is my counterpart, Krista Brown, who is the group manager for the stormwater compliance section. So today we are going to be providing some background on why construction stormwater regulations are important. We'll review some of the changes that came about in December 2024 as part of the PAG-02 reissuance. And those things were also incorporated into the individual NPDES permit. And lastly, we'll talk about expectations regarding site compliance during and after construction. So before we start, I'd like to point out that DEP has a learning resource called Clean Water Academy, where you can find regularly updated training on a variety of topics. We'll be providing a high-level overview today, but it's highly recommended that you also take time to review the courses in Clean Water Academy to gain a more thorough understanding of requirements depending on the needs of your site and project. So in presenting today's training, we are assuming that you have at least a basic working knowledge of DEP's Chapter 102 regulations and its role in preventing accelerated erosion and sedimentation during construction, as well as managing stormwater following construction. We're not going to go over the basics of Chapter 102, but we did think it was beneficial to briefly touch on why these regulations are important. So the first goal of Chapter 102 is to minimize accelerated erosion and sedimentation caused by earth disturbance activities. So what's so bad about a little bit of mud? Sediment is the #1 pollutant by volume in Pennsylvania's streams. It's considered a pollutant for numerous reasons. One of the main concerns being that other pollutants can hitch a ride with the sediment-laden runoff and impact downstream aquatic ecosystems, recreational activities, and human and animal safety. Sediment entering stormwater degrades the quality of water for everyone and everything. Sediment fills up storm drains, which carry water away from roads and homes, increasing the potential for flooding. Sedimentation can increase the cost of treating drinking water and can result in odor and taste problems. Sediment deposits in rivers and streams can alter the flow of water and reduce water depth, which makes navigation and recreational use more difficult and less appealing. In addition, algal blooms and sediment-laden streams also prevent animals from seeking food. Murky water prevents natural vegetation from growing in water, which affects the food chain. Sediment can clog fish gills, reduce resistance to disease, lower growth rates, and affect fish egg and larvae development. Sediment in stream beds also disrupts the natural food chain by destroying the habitat where the smallest stream organisms live, which can cause fish starvation. Sedimentation of a stream bed can cause the water to be shallower, the water warms up, and then actually holds less oxygen for aquatic life to survive. So in summary, preventing erosion and sedimentation during construction can help prevent all of these things from happening. So with certain exceptions, Chapter 102 and federal regulations require National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES, permits for construction projects that involve at least 1 acre of earth disturbance over the life of a project. So what is meant by life of the project? You probably have also heard this referred to as Common Plan of Development, which is a contiguous area where multiple construction activities may be taking place at different times on different schedules under one common plan. Common Plan of Development is important to prevent circumvention of the regulations and permitting, thus helping to ensure proper control of stormwater generated by the site activities. If you ever want to learn more about Common Plan of Development, there is an FAQ on the topic available on DEP's Construction Stormwater website. We'll provide this link at the end of the presentation. There are 2 types of NPDES permits, general and individual. General permits are issued on a statewide basis every 5 years, and applicants seek coverage under those statewide permits. Individual permits are issued on a project-by-project basis with permit conditions that may be specific to that project site. At this time, there are 3 construction stormwater NPDES permits that could be used for housing development projects. The first NPDES permit is known as the PAG-01 General Permit. The PAG-01 was issued for the first time in 2022 and is intended for small projects under 5 acres of earth disturbance, such as a single-family home, that are expected to involve low environmental risk. The PAG-01 has a simplified application process and shorter application review period than any other NPDES permit. However, there are specific eligibility requirements that must be met in order to obtain coverage under this general permit, such as limits on the amount of impervious area. Everyone with PAG-01 coverage is subject to the same terms and conditions, including the current expiration date of February 28th, 2027, regardless of when permit coverage is granted. That's the case for all general permit coverage. They expire at exactly the same time. Now, the second permit might be one that you guys are all a little bit more familiar with, and that is the PAG-02 General Permit. The PAG-02 General Permit was reissued and went into effect on December 8th, 2024. Similar to the PAG-01, the permit conditions and expiration date of December 7th, 2029 are the same for everyone covered under the PAG-02. Again, this general permit also has specific eligibility requirements to qualify for coverage. Which brings us to the third permit type, the individual NPDES permit. So unlike the general permits, like I said, this permit is issued on an individual basis. Note that there are more individual NPDES permit types outside of the Chapter 102 Construction Stormwater Program. Those other NPDES permit types cover things like sewage, industrial stormwater, but there is only this one permit for construction stormwater. So when we're talking about the individual permit from a 102 perspective, this is the one that we're talking about. This permit has similar standard conditions that are within the general permits, but may also have other special conditions based on the environmental conditions and proposed activities at the site. There are several reasons why a project may have an individual permit, but generally, if a project does not meet the eligibility requirements of the 2 general permits, they will need to apply for an individual permit. The most common reason for this is because the project is located in a special protection watershed, and the second is probably site contamination. In addition, an individual permit is issued with its own permit term, which is 5 years from the date of issuance. I just mentioned that the PAG-02 was reissued on December 8th, 2024. With that reissuance came a number of changes, which are also included for individual permits issued on or after December 8th, 2024. There's a small typo on the slide that I just noticed, as well as existing individual permits that are renewed or receive a major amendment. Similarly, some of the items that have been incorporated in the PAG-02 and individual permits will also be incorporated into the PAG-01 when it is reissued in 2027. We only have an hour today, so we've opted to focus on specific changes, but just be aware that this presentation today is not all-inclusive, and a copy of the PAG-02 is always available for viewing on DEP's website. One of the things that we did is adding or updating certain definitions for clarity purposes. Again, I'm not going to go through all of the definitions. I would recommend that you review the definition section of the permit if you haven't already done so, but I am going to just highlight a few of these. So DEP added a definition for designee. Essentially, a designee is a person who serves as an alternative to a licensed professional who may conduct oversight of critical stages of PCSM plan implementation. However, the permit now indicates that a designee must have the knowledge, skill, training, and education in the field of engineering, landscape architecture, geology, or land surveying that is beyond that possessed by a layperson, and upon which a licensed professional can rely upon to provide oversight of critical stages of the PCSM plan. The permit also states that the designee must be independent from the operator co-permittee responsible for the construction and installation of SCMs on site. So essentially, this means that if a licensed professional is going to designate someone to provide the oversight of critical stages, it has to be someone that has knowledge and training to do so, and that person must be independent of the folks completing the installation. Basically, we're just trying to avoid the situation where somebody is essentially checking their own work. Another definition that we've added is operator co-permittee. So previous permits referred to both an operator and a co-applicant as simply co-permittees. The operator co-permittee definition now distinguishes between the two terms and is specific to operators who become co-permittees because of the work they're conducting on a project site, whereas co-applicants are those that actually have their name on the permit. So if somebody is an applicant co-permittee, like I said, their name would be on the permit. If they're an operator co-permittee, then they are obviously, responsible while they're on the site, but their name is not on the permit itself. The DEP has also included definitions for record drawings. Under the 102 regulations, record drawings must be provided to the responsible party identified to carry out the long-term operation and maintenance of stormwater control measures, or SCMs. DEP has defined the term to ensure permittees understand what is expected for record drawings. In addition, record drawings also have additional uses under the permit, as we'll kind of discuss later in the presentation. Sorry about that. So permit requirement updates also include additional guidelines for construction dewatering discharges. These discharges would include those from the dewatering of trenches and excavations, but they do not apply to discharges from basins or traps. The goal of the dewatering requirements has always been to ensure that discharges from dewatering activities are treated before they reach the surface water. This can be done by utilizing upland vegetated areas of the project site to infiltrate construction dewatering water. If this condition is not available, the dewatering discharge would need to be treated with an approved series of 2 or more BMPs prior to discharge to surface waters. However, if the permittee can document that the outflow from a single BMP will achieve a turbidity of 50 NTUs or less, they can request written approval from DEP or Conservation District. This new requirement aligns with EPA's Construction General Permit, which is why this was included. There is also a new requirement for post-construction testing to determine whether as-built infiltration rates for infiltration SCMs are within a tolerance range of the design infiltration rate. This confirmation testing became a requirement as of December 8th, 2025. So this testing is necessary anytime the area of an infiltration SCM has not been protected. Say, for example, the area was compacted. The licensed professional is expected to make this determination, but DEP or a conservation district may also direct the permittee to conduct testing if they believe there are concerns. Testing is always required when an ENS BMP will be converted to a PCSM SCM and used for infiltration, such as a sediment basin that is being converted to an infiltration basin. This testing must be overseen by a licensed professional or designee. It should be conducted after major earthwork is complete, prior to placing soil, media, or stone, and once the drainage area to the SCM is stabilized or in the process of becoming stabilized, including both impervious and vegetated surfaces. If the drainage area isn't yet permanently stabilized, then the permittee is sort of fighting an uphill battle against sediment deposition while construction continues. The construction confirmation testing for infiltration capacity can be performed generally one of 3 ways. either a simulated runoff test using a ponded depth of no less than 6 inches within the SCM, an inspection during and after a storm event that produces a ponding depth of no less than 6 inches within the SCM, or infiltration testing using acceptable methods from Pennsylvania's Stormwater BMP manual as amended and updated. Yes, that includes the future finalization of the PCSM manual. Note that while percolation tests are in the Stormwater BMP manual, DEP does not consider a perk test an appropriate method for confirmation testing. With confirmation testing, the licensed professional must evaluate the confirmation testing results and notify the permittee that the infiltration SEM meets the purpose and intent of the approved PCSM plan without overflowing at the storm event the SCM is designed to manage and will protect waters of the Commonwealth. The permittee should not proceed to complete construction of the SCM until this notification is given. In the event the licensed professional determines that the SCM will not function as designed, the permittee must then implement corrective measures under the direction of the licensed professional and retest prior to the completion of the SCM. If the licensed professional recommends changes to the dimensions, location, or type of SCM, the permittee must notify DEP or the Conservation District prior to implementing the changes. These confirmation testing results must be submitted with the SCM construction certification form, which we'll get to in a few minutes. But because this is a brand new requirement, I very much urge you to read the requirements that are laid out in the permit conditions, as well as reviewing the instructions that come with the SCM construction certification form. We've done our best to try to make this new requirements as clear as possible.
All right. Hi, everybody. So as Crystal mentioned, my name is Krista Brown, and I am the group manager for the stormwater compliance section out of central office. So next, we're going to start by discussing some of the updated or new forms that came about due to the permit changes related to the 2024 PAG-02. In some cases, the form updates are not associated with changes in the permit requirements, but rather to provide some clarity to simplify or assist in the process. We'll touch on a few of these updates today, but for more information, please refer to the lessons that are available in Clean Water Academy, because there's a lot, right? So we're not going to have time to take a deep dive into all of them. All right. So as of December 28th, as of December 8th, 2025, those completing the VSIR need to be qualified. This change was made to ensure consistency with EPA's construction general permit. The 2024 PAG-02 includes a requirement for site inspections to be conducted by qualified personnel. There are 3 options to provide to demonstrate qualification to conduct site inspections. The first is completion of the Qualified Site Inspector Training Program within DEP's Clean Water Academy. This training will need to be completed every 2 years. Second, if you hold a valid CPESC or CSSWI certification, that can be presented as a qualification also. Lastly is submission of documentation of training and experience to the permitting agency, which would require written approval prior to conducting site inspections. So it's important to note that for those that complete VSIRs for PennDOT, the department's QVSI course will need to be completed along with the additional PennDOT module, and PennDOT will not accept alternative qualification. So if you're going to be conducting those VSIRs for PennDOT, then you need to take the Qualified Site Inspector Training Program on Clean Water Academy. Okay, so several updates were also made to the visual site inspection report itself. One of the more significant changes is the requirement to take colored photographs of all ENS and PCSM SCMs on the project site at least monthly, and when deficiencies in BMPs and SCMs are identified. While full exemption to the photo requirement will not be entertained, it may be possible to develop an alternative photo schedule based on the conditions of the site. This request must be made in writing to the Conservation District for approval. Keep in mind, if this alternative is approved, it can be rescinded by DEP or the district at any time if non-compliance is observed. Notification will be provided to the permittee in writing if this ends up being the case. Another update we would like to touch on in more detail is a change to the procedures for co-permittees. So those that meet the definition of an operator under 102.1 are considered co-permittees under 102.5H. So previously, co-permittees were acknowledged and removed via a co-permittee acknowledgement and release form. Permittees covered under the 2024 PAG-02 and new IPs or those with updated permit conditions after December 7, 2024 will no longer submit these forms. Rather, they will identify operators that come and go via the visual site inspection report. For PAG-01s and IPs that were issued before December 8, 2024 that haven't been revised or modified, co-permittee acknowledgement and release forms will still need to be submitted, but these forms will eventually be retired once their use is no longer required by these permit types. So the 2019 PAG-02 General Permit required recording of a legal instrument for disclosing PCSM SEMs within 45 days of permit issuance. Proof of the submission was required to be provided with the Notice of Termination, or NOT, or transfer application if applicable. However, what we were finding is that this just wasn't happening. People were not completing the recording, and we weren't finding out about it until the NOT time. So now the full recording and proof of recording will need to be provided to the office that approved coverage prior to scheduling the pre-construction meeting, with the exception of projects conducted for the benefit of a public utility as defined in the Public Utility Code and other projects that receive prior written approval from DEP or a county conservation district. For utility projects and others with prior written approval, the instrument recording must be completed within 45 days of permit issuance. Once submitted, the information will be reviewed to ensure all the required information was included in the recording. If deficiencies in the recording are identified, then they will need to be addressed before the pre-construction meeting can be held. If your project was originally covered under the 2019 PAG-02 and the pre-construction meeting was already held, then obviously this requirement will not apply, but you were still required to ensure that the recording was completed within 45 days of the original permit issuance. So if the recording wasn't completed, then please take steps to complete that recording now, as it will need to be provided upon submission of the NOT and reflect actual as-built conditions. So, if there were any changes to that PCSM plan throughout the life of that project, then that recording will need to be updated. To assist in making sure that all the required information is included in the recording, the department has created a checklist. This checklist was put together to assist the applicant with this process, as well as to assist the permitting agency, so DEP or the district, with review of the documents submitted. Each county recorder of deeds has their own procedures and fee schedules. However, this document and the associated instructions will provide guidance and a resource for permittees and counties to better understand this permit requirement. NPDES permits associated with earth disturbance activity now require submittal of an annual report. The new annual report form is short but useful, as it will assist with the tracking of a project status as well as speed up permit terminations. As we have been saying, this reporting requirement will also apply to new individual permits issued after December 7, 2024, and eventually existing individual permits upon renewal or major amendments issued. The reporting period for existing permittees will be October 1st to September 30th of each year within the permit term. However, new permittees will have at least one full year of permit coverage before the requirement to submit an annual report begins. The permittee must submit an annual report form to the permitting agency on December 7th of each year. For those of you that had PAG-02 permit coverage before December 8, 2024, your first annual report was due this past December 7th. So if you haven't submitted it yet, please do so. All right, next up, we have the SCM construction certification form. This form is to assist with project status and permit termination. Again, a lot of these things were put in place to try to make sure that when it came to NOT time, we have all the information that we needed to gather throughout the life of the project. So this form requires a licensed professional or designee to report on the installation of stormwater control measures, including inspections conducted and whether the SCM will function as designed. However, as currently required, if there are deviations from the approved plan or corrections are deemed necessary by the licensed professional, they are still required to be submitted as a field change or permit amendment. While designee can complete the form, a licensed professional must still sign off on it. The form is required to be submitted within 30 days of SCM completion and includes a section for confirmation testing of infiltration SCMs. We are hopeful that completion of this form will help solve past problems with permit terminations where an NOT was submitted only to find that there are outstanding SCM issues that need to be addressed. Addressing these issues at permit termination stage can often create additional costs and complications, particularly if lot ownership has changed. All right, new property owner notification form. So we had something similar previously. So this is kind of similar form, just new name. The goal here is to provide this form to educate people who will ultimately be responsible, living in that house and ultimately responsible for, the long-term operation and maintenance of that SCM on their property. If a permittee sells a lot with an existing or planned SCM to another developer or other party that will not ultimately own the lot, then this form is not required to be completed until the lot is sold to that ultimate owner or new homeowner. If the property owner refuses to sign the notification, the permittee can note refuse to sign, but the permittee should retain proof that they attempted to acquire that signature, such as maintaining a certified letter receipt. This completed form must be submitted to DEP or the Conservation District within 30 days of property transfer. This form only needs to be used for the first instance of a property transfer between the developer and the new homeowner. So if, during the life of that project, that lot sold 4 times, the developer does not have to provide this form to each subsequent homeowner, just that first one. Okay, so we'll take questions just on those forms before we move on.
I think I accidentally clicked ahead, Krista. There are 2 questions that have come in. I'll go ahead and answer the first one. So for the question is, for infiltration SCMs, can you design with MRCs because you're assuming you won't have infiltration and bypass infiltration testing before construction, site characterization, and post-construction? First and foremost, MRCs should always be sort of the last option. So you still need to do pre-development site characterization and infiltration testing before you go to MRC. If you try to submit a permit using MRC without having done proper infiltration testing, that will be indicated as a significant deficiency. And again, the infiltration testing is only required, the confirmation testing is only required for infiltration SCMs. And then Krista, I will let you answer the next one. Can the design professional PE complete the visual site inspections?
Yeah, we don't dictate who necessarily has to complete those visual site inspections. That would be up to the permittee. If they want their PE to do that, they're welcome to, to do that, to have that, the PE to conduct those inspections. That's up to them.
Okay. That is everything that has come in.
All right. Okay. So site compliance starts with implementation of the approved plan. If it is determined at any point that the approved plan cannot be implemented as designed, then the permittee needs to contact their consultant to amend their permit so the plan can be altered for their needs in compliance with Chapter 102. Communication is key. So keep the lines of communication open with the permitting agency so they can assist you in staying in compliance with your permit and regulations. Your consultant may be reliable, but ultimately the permittee will be held liable for any violations, not that consultant. So again, whenever there's a question, make sure that you're reaching out to DEP or the district to make sure that you're doing, meeting all your regulatory requirements. All right, the ENS plan has construction details which explain how to install the proposed ENS BMPs properly. It is important to review these details to understand what is needed to install or build the BMP. If you feel something is missing or incorrect, then the plan designer should be contacted immediately because any changes need to be approved by DEP or the district prior to implementation. All materials that are needed for BMP installation should be on site before the commencement of the associated earth disturbance activities. That means don't start digging the area for the sediment basin if the flow and outlet control structures have not yet been delivered to the site or you don't have the materials needed for stabilization. Whoop. I went ahead too fast. Okay, so the construction sequence is an important B&P that was also carefully designed and must be adhered to, and failure to do so is a violation of the regulatory and permit requirements. The E&S B&Ps are not installed in the correct order. The entire E&S plan will not work. So failure to follow the construction sequence is one of the most common violations we see and often leads to pollution incidents, negative impacts to neighboring properties, and damage to PCSM SCMs. Thank you. So again, it is of the utmost importance that the sequence be followed. Otherwise, failure to do so may lead to a stop work order until the site is brought into compliance, which again will cause construction delays. The same standards that we just discussed also apply to the PCSM installation. Reference and follow your construction details, stay in sequence, and make sure all materials are on site and ready to go. There are other factors to think about to stay in compliance with the PCSM plan. Many involve thinking ahead to avoid additional costs and delays. Know where your proposed infiltration areas are located before accessing the site. Most likely your plan required the marking of these areas so they don't end up compacted. Compaction of infiltration areas causes the need for confirmation testing, as Crystal discussed earlier. So this adds cost and time to the project and could also limit what can then be built on site. In addition, the PCSM plan also proposes non-structural SCMs that you may not even be aware of. So these can be as simple as protecting a forested area or natural stormwater conveyances. These practices seem simple, but that is the point, right? The permittee is getting credit for doing the right thing and preserving beneficial features. If these features are impacted, it could cause the need for the redesign of the entire PCSM plan, which will cause project delays and additional costs. The licensed professional or their designee must be on site during the implementation of critical stages. So it is important that there is a plan in place to get the LP on site as soon as possible to prevent construction delays. Before your contractor leaves the site, be sure that the SCMs that they installed actually function per the plan. Ensure that required confirmation testing has been completed and that the LP has signed off on the SCM certification. But keep in mind that the SCMs will need to be maintained until the responsibility can be transferred at the time of NOT approval. All right, so after all earth disturbance activities are complete, meaning that the site was built in accordance with the PCSM plan, the area permanently stabilized, and the temporary E&S controls removed, a notice of termination must be submitted for all projects covered under Chapter 102 permit. So the notice of termination, or NOT form, along with all required supplemental information, will need to be completed and submitted to the permitting agency for review. It is important to note that the regulations say upon permanent stabilization and the implementation of the approved plans, an NOT should be submitted. So this means that if you finish your project in year 2 of the permit, you should be submitting the NOT shortly thereafter, not waiting until permit expiration. The NOT and attachments are first reviewed for completeness and consistency with the approved plans and permit. As with most forms, there is a checklist which assists the permittee in providing a complete NOT submission. Detailed instructions are also provided with the NOT form, providing guidance to get the application complete with the initial submission. Revised recording is required if there were changes to the responsible party or the SCM type, design, drainage area, impervious area, or operation and maintenance requirements. If the NOT is found to be incomplete, the permitting agency will provide a letter with the deficiencies that need to be addressed before the NOT process will continue. However, just as during the permit review, if there are minor deficiencies, the permitting agency may still choose to schedule the final inspection with the intention that the issues will be quickly resolved. A final inspection will be performed as part of the NOT review. It is best for the permittee, co-permittees, and licensed professionals to be present during the final inspection. Be prepared to support installation and stabilization and function of PCSM SCMs at the inspection. So for example, if you have a spray irrigation system, be prepared to support that the spray heads actually spray. So the inspector is also there to confirm that all E&S B&Ps have been removed. If they have not, you will most likely fail your inspection unless you can remove them in real time and don't need to stabilize anything, and will need to remove those B&Ps, repair and stabilize the areas if needed. You would then need to contact the permitting agency again, once those areas are stabilized, to come out for a follow-up final inspection. So an inspection report will be issued regardless of whether issues are found. If no issues are found, the report will state no violations, and the NOT acknowledgement letter will accompany the report. Otherwise, an NOT deficiency or denial letter will be issued outlining violations and issues that need to be addressed before the NOT can be acknowledged. Depending on the nature of the deficiencies, you may need to consider renewing your permit to extend it into the next permit term, to give you, the time that you need to finalize, stabilization and bring your site into compliance. All right, so helpful tips for the NOT. So first tip is similar to the previous forms. Read the instructions and use a checklist for every NOT submission. We have all these checklists created to try to make it as easy as possible. So, they're available. Make sure you're using them. These documents are there to let you know what the reviewer is looking for and to find the submission complete. Incomplete submissions cause delays. Another complication for NOT acknowledgement is the weather conditions. So a final inspection typically cannot be performed in the winter. Snow cover can hinder the ability to confirm permanent stabilization, and some SCMs require winterization, and thus the permittee cannot support functionality. Not to mention, if any disturbed areas need to be fixed, right, you can't grow anything in the winter. So tip number 2 is to shoot to complete your project during the growing season. That way the NOT process can continue right into a final inspection, and adjustments can be made if they are needed. If the NPDES permit will expire in the winter, you should plan to renew your coverage so you can terminate during the growing season. But keep in mind, annual reporting and annual fees remain due until the NOT is approved. The third tip is to complete the record keeping and reporting as you go. So throughout the life of the permit, right? Don't wait until the end of the project. There are timelines in place for submittal of the documents, such as within 30 days of SCM completion for SCM construction certification form. These timelines are in place to keep your permit moving smoothly. If you wait until the end of a project to certify your SCMs, you may find that they were not installed correctly, were not maintained properly, or your licensed professional is not comfortable signing off on work that they did not witness. Lastly, it is the responsibility of the permittee to ensure that all regulatory requirements and permit terms and conditions are met. Permittees are strongly encouraged to plan ahead for potential issues with future landowners and third parties, and to take steps early and throughout the permit process to ensure that the permittee has a legally enforceable means to meet their regulatory and permit requirements. So, if you sell a lot, that doesn't mean that it's not your responsibility. Until that NOT is approved, you need to make sure that you maintain your access and some control over that lot. Okay, so moving on to compliance and enforcement. So lastly, we need to discuss compliance and enforcement. Overall, it is expected that permittees and operators will voluntarily comply with all NPDES permit conditions and regulatory requirements. As stated earlier, completion of the visual site inspection is intended to help the permittee stay in compliance. So if a permittee finds that they are out of compliance, it is in their best interest to self-report those violations. In addition, permittees are required to immediately report any incident causing or threatening pollution. This can be in the form of a phone call or email. It is expected that permittees take steps to immediately address those situations. That being said, DEP also has a responsibility to monitor these sites to verify compliance or take action when needed to bring sites into compliance. Sorry, I lost my spot here. To verify compliance, site inspections are conducted. Most NPDES inspections are conducted by delegated county conservation district staff. DEP determines the inspection frequency depending on a variety of factors, such as the size of the site, if a discharge may impact high quality or exceptional value surface waters, and the compliance history of the permittee and or operators. We are also required to respond to all complaints received, and if violations are observed, then obviously we'll be back out to follow up on those violations to make sure that they've been abated. A written inspection report will be drafted once the inspector returns to the office, and typically the inspection report will be sent via email. If violations are identified, the inspector will note that the inspection report is serving as a compliance notice or notice of violation, depending on the level of district delegation. So please make sure that you're reading your inspection reports. Anytime violations are documented and enforcement action may be taken, common enforcement actions include field orders, sometimes referred to as stop work orders, consent assessment of civil penalties, and consent order and agreements. All right. So the last thing we want to mention is the main web page that Crystal had mentioned earlier, associated with the NPDES construction permitting. This includes announcements as well as an explanation of permit types. Let's see. It's not doing anything. When you click on the ENS resources button, you'll find all our forms, documents, spreadsheets, as well as the various FAQs and guidance documents we mentioned during today's training. All right, so we want to thank you for listening to us today. And our contact information is on the screen. In case you guys have any questions, you can obviously reach out to Crystal or myself directly, or the regional office or conservation district.